The summer I turned 13 was the summer I learned what calluses really were. Not the metaphorical kind, the actual, painful, fluid-filled blisters that eventually harden into patches of thick skin. Get up, Michelle. You're coming to work. With me today. My father's voice crashed through my dream like a wrecking ball at 5:30 in the morning. I burrowed deeper under my comforter, hoping he'd think I hadn't heard him. Michelle! Now! The second call came with the flip of my bedroom light switch and the yanking away of my blanket. In the harsh yellow glow, my father loomed in the doorway, all ready. Dressed in his worn Carhartt pants and faded company polo, steel-toed boots laced tight. Dad, it's summer break, I mumbled, shielding my eyes. Can't I sleep in? Not anymore. Your mum and I decided you need to learn some real-world skills, something to put some hair on your chest. I sat up, suddenly more awake. But I don't want hair on my chest. He didn't laugh. Dad never really laughed at my jokes. 15 minutes. Wear jeans, a t-shirt you don't care about, and those hiking boots from last year's camping trip. And bring a water bottle. He disappeared down the hallway. Before I could protest further, I heard him in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, cabinet doors opening and closing as he packed his lunch. My mother was conspicuously absent from this morning ambush, probably still asleep, or maybe hiding in their bathroom to avoid witnessing my conscription into child labour. I wondered if she'd really agreed to this, or if Dad was just saying we decided to give himself cover. 20 minutes later, I'd deliberately taken longer than he'd specified. I dragged myself into the kitchen. My father glanced at his watch but didn't comment on my tardiness. Grab something to eat. We leave in 5. I snatched a granola bar from the pantry and stuffed it in my pocket. My stomach was too knotted to eat. This felt like punishment, but I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong recently. My grades had been fine. I hadn't broken curfew or talked back more than usual. Dad, why am I really going with you? I asked as we climbed into his pickup truck, the metal of the door handle, still cool in the early morning air. He started the engine before answering. Because you spend too much time with your nose in those fantasy books or staring at your phone, it's time you learned what real work feels like. But I'm 13. Isn't there, like, child labour laws or something? He snorted. You're not going. On payroll. You're helping your old man and learning something useful. Call it an internship if that makes you feel better. The drive to the construction site took 40 minutes. I watched the sun climb over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been. So resentful. Dad turned on talk radio, some angry men complaining about politics, and I leaned my head against the window, trying to catch a few more minutes of sleep. We pulled into a dirt lot beside what looked like it would eventually be an office building. The skeleton of the first floor was up. Concrete foundation, metal beams, some walls framed but not yet covered. A few other trucks were already there, men in hard hats milling around, drinking coffee from thermoses. Here. Dad tossed something into my lap, a yellow hard hat smaller than his. Safety first. You planned this, I accused, turning the hat over in my hands. It wasn't brand new, but it wasn't his either. Found it in the supply trailer. It'll fit you fine. He didn't deny the premeditation. As we approached the group of workers, I felt suddenly self-conscious in my too big jeans and faded green t-shirt. I was the only female in sight, and certainly the only kid. Morning, Frank, called out a tall man with a salt and pepper beard. Who's your shadow? My daughter, Michelle. She's learning the family business this summer. The family business? Since when was construction the family business? Dad was just a foreman. Mum worked part-time at the library. No one had consulted me about joining any family business. Nice to meet you, Michelle, said the bearded man, extending a calloused hand. I'm Ray, site supervisor. I shook his hand, trying to match his firm grip. Hi. Frank's crew is hanging drywall today, Ray said, glancing at my father. Think she can handle that? Dad looked me up and down. She's stronger than she looks. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a challenge. The morning passed in a blur of confusion. dust and increasing arm fatigue. Dad put me to work carrying sheets of drywall from the supply pile to wherever the men were working. Each sheet wasn't terribly heavy, maybe 50 pounds, but they were awkward to carry, especially for someone my size. The rough edges scraped against my forearms, leaving red marks that stung when sweat dripped into them. By lunchtime, I had blisters forming on both palms from gripping the drywall edges. I sat on an overturned bucket, examining my hands while nibbling half-heartedly at the sandwich Dad had bought me from a food truck that stopped by the site. "Hands hurting?" he asked, sitting next to me with his own sandwich. I quickly closed my palms. "No, they're fine." "Let me see." Reluctantly, I opened my hands. The blisters were small but definitely forming, one at the base of each finger and a larger one on my right palm. "You'll toughen up," he said with a nod. "Everyone gets blisters." "Their first few days. But why do I need to toughen up? I don't want to be a construction worker." Dad took a long drink from his water bottle before answering. "What do you want to be?" The question caught me off guard. Dad had never asked about my future plans before. "I don't know yet. Maybe a writer or a veterinarian." He raised an eyebrow. "Writers need to understand real life before they can write about it, and vets need to be comfortable with physical work and pain. Either way, this experience won't hurt you." My father's logic was dubious at best, but I didn't have the energy to argue. After lunch, the real torture began. Dad moved me from carrying drywall to helping hold pieces in place while the men secured them to the wall frames. This meant standing with my arms raised, supporting part of a drywall sheet's weight, while someone else screwed it into place. My shoulders burned, my blisters stung, and a fine layer of drywall dust coated my skin, mixing with sweat to form an itchy paste. By mid-afternoon, I was fighting back tears. One particularly large blister on my left palm had broken, leaving a raw patch that hurt with every grip. When I finally couldn't hold back a soft sob as I helped lift another sheet, one of the workers, a younger guy named Carlos, noticed. "Hey, Frank, maybe give the kid a break. She's bleeding." Dad glanced over from where he was measuring a piece for cutting. He walked over and examined my hand, now smeared with a mixture of blood and drywall dust. "Just a popped blister," he said dismissively. "Part of the process." Then he did something I'll never forget. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short chuckle, but the message was clear. My pain was amusing to him, a sign of weakness he expected me to overcome. "Why don't you go get a drink of water?" Carlos suggested kindly. "Take 5 minutes." I nodded gratefully and retreated to the cooler where we kept our water bottles. As I poured cold water over my stinging hands, I blinked back tears of both pain and humiliation. What was Dad trying to prove? That I wasn't tough enough? That I needed to man up? The worst part was that I couldn't even call Mom to come get me. My phone was in Dad's truck, and anyway, she was probably at work by now. I was trapped here until quitting time, which Dad had informed me was 5:30, a full 12-hour day. As I stood there, nursing my wounds and my pride, Ray the supervisor approached. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been this morning. I quickly wiped my eyes with my sleeve, leaving a smear of dust across my face. "I'm fine." Ray looked skeptical. "First day's always the hardest. But you know..." He lowered his voice and glanced toward where my father was working. "Not everyone's cut out for construction, and that's perfectly fine." Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of work gloves, thin leather ones, well worn but intact. "These might help with those blisters. They're old, but they'll do the job." I accepted the gloves gratefully. "Thank you. Don't mention it." He paused, then added, "Your dad's one of my best workers, but sometimes the best workers forget what it was like when they started." As Ray walked away, I pulled on the gloves. They were too big, but they covered my blisters and provided a barrier between my raw skin and the rough drywall. The afternoon dragged on, my arms and back aching with each passing hour. But with the gloves, at least my hands weren't getting worse. By the time Dad announced we were finished for the day, I could barely stand straight. Every muscle protested as I climbed into his truck. We rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, me too exhausted to speak, him seemingly lost in thought. Finally, as we approached our neighbourhood, he broke the silence. "You did okay today, for your first time." I stared out the window, not ready to accept this meagre praise. "Why did you laugh when you saw my hands bleeding?" Dad's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I wasn't laughing at you being hurt." "Sure. Looked like it," he sighed. "I was 13 when my father first took me to work with him. Roofing, not construction. I came home with blisters so bad I couldn't hold a pencil the next day. When I cried, he told me to stop being a baby." I turned to look at him, surprised by this rare glimpse into his childhood. "So you think that makes it okay? To laugh at me? Because your dad was mean to you?" Dad pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, he seemed older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd noticed before. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't make it okay." He reached over and gently took my hand, examining the gloves I still wore. "Where'd you get these?" "Ray gave them to me." Dad nodded slowly. "Ray's a good man." He paused, then added, "We'll get you your own pair tomorrow. Better ones." Tomorrow. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a one-day lesson. This was my summer now. As we walked into the house, Mum looked up from the dining table where she was working on her laptop. Her eyes widened as she took in my filthy appearance. "My God, Frank, what did you do to her?" "She worked construction," Dad said simply, heading for the refrigerator. "She did fine." Mum motioned for me to come closer, examining my dust-covered face and the glove still protecting my battered hands. "This wasn't what we discussed," she hissed at Dad. "You said you were going to show her what you do, not use her as free labour." So she hadn't agreed after all. Somehow that made me feel slightly better. "She needs to learn what real work is," Dad insisted, cracking open a beer. "All her friends are getting summer jobs. As babysitters or at the mall, Frank, not hauling. Drywall." Mum turned to me. "Go shower, honey. I'll put some antibiotic cream on those blisters afterward." As I climbed the stairs to my bathroom, I heard them continuing to argue in hushed voices. My shoulders ached with each step, and despite my exhaustion, my mind raced. Tomorrow I'd have to go back, and the day after that. All summer long, apparently, unless I found a way out. Under the hot shower, watching drywall dust swirl down the drain, I made a decision. If Dad wanted me to learn about the real world, I'd show him I could do that without destroying my body in the process. I just needed a plan, and by tomorrow morning I would have one. Sleep eluded me that night despite my physical exhaustion. Every position hurt, my shoulders throbbed, my lower back ached, and my hands stung beneath the antibiotic cream Mum had gently applied. But it wasn't just the pain keeping me awake, it was the need for a plan. The argument between my parents had continued well into the evening, Mum's voice rising occasionally with phrases like, "She's still a child," and "This isn't the 1950s, Frank," countered by my father's stubborn insistence that I needed to learn the value of hard work and develop some grit. By 1 a.m., I had formulated 3 possible strategies. 1. Perform so poorly that Dad would give up on me as a lost cause. 2. Find an alternate summer job that Dad would consider acceptable. 3. Make myself so useful at the construction site in ways that didn't destroy my hands that he'd reconsider my role. Option 1 seemed risky. Dad wasn't known for giving up easily, and deliberate incompetence might just make him more determined. Option 3 depended too much on his willingness to adapt. That left option 2. At 5:25 a.m., 5 minutes before Dad's wake-up call would crash through my consciousness, I was already dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt to protect my arms from yesterday's scrapes, sitting on the edge of my bed with a proposal prepared. "You're up," Dad said, surprised when he opened my door. "I am, and I have an idea I want to discuss." He raised an eyebrow but leaned against the doorframe, willing to listen. "I've been thinking about what you said, about learning real world, Skills and the value of hard work. I began, carefully using his own language. And I agree that's important. Dad's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of surprise in his eyes. But I think there are other ways I could learn those lessons while contributing more meaningfully. Such as? I took a deep breath. What if I handled paperwork at the construction office instead, or organised supplies? Something that would actually help the business rather than just carrying drywall that the men could move faster without me anyway. Dad's brow furrowed. The point isn't just about being useful, Michelle. It's about developing physical resilience, mental toughness. I understand that. But wouldn't learning business operations be valuable too? Isn't that part of the family? Business! I used air quotes, reminding him of yesterday's claim. He studied me for a long moment. You know we don't have a formal office, just the job trailer. Then I could organise the trailer. Ray mentioned something about how the supply tracking was a mess. Dad narrowed his eyes. When did Ray tell you that? When he gave me the gloves, I admitted. He said something about wishing someone had time to sort out the inventory system. Dad checked his watch. Get your breakfast. We leave in 10 minutes. I'll think about it on the drive. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a flat rejection either. I counted that as progress. The morning air was already warm as we pulled into the construction site. My stomach churned with anxiety. Would Dad agree to my proposal, or would I face another? Day of physical agony? As we walked toward the gathering workers, Ray approached us, coffee thermos in hand. Morning, Frank. Michelle. He nodded at me with a small smile. Better prepared today? Yes, sir, I said, showing him I was wearing his gloves. Thank you again. Dad cleared his throat. Ray, got a minute? Need to discuss something. They walked. A few paces away, just far enough that I couldn't quite make out their conversation. I watched their body language, Dad gesturing toward the job trailer, Ray nodding thoughtfully, then both of them glancing back at me. After what felt like an eternity, they returned. All right, Dad said. Here's the deal. You'll spend the morning helping Carlos hang drywall like yesterday. My heart sank. But after lunch, he continued, Ray will show you the inventory system in the trailer. If you can come up with a better organisation method, prove it's actually useful, you can split your time between physical work and office work. It wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for, but it was a compromise. And more importantly, it was an opportunity. Thank you, I said, trying to sound grateful rather than victorious. The morning was marginally better than yesterday. The gloves protected my existing blisters, though new ones formed at my wrists where the glove edges rubbed. Carlos was friendly, offering tips on how to hold the drywall with less strain on my back. Still, by lunchtime, every muscle screamed for relief. Don't look so miserable, Dad said, as we ate sandwiches from the food truck again. The office work. Won't be any picnic either. Ray said that trailer's been neglected for months. I nodded, hiding my excitement behind a neutral expression. I'll do my best with it. After lunch, Ray led me to the job trailer. A dusty, cluttered space with a small desk, filing cabinets, and shelves overflowing with paperwork, catalogues, and supply manifests. Here's our command centre, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. Not much to look at, I'm afraid. The trailer was hot, the small air conditioning unit in the window struggling against the summer heat. But it wasn't physically, punishing, and that was enough for me. What exactly needs organising? I asked, already surveying the chaos. Ray ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Everything, kid. But start with the supply inventory. We lose time and money when workers can't find what they need, or when we order duplicates because we didn't realise we already had something. He showed me the paper forms they use to track materials, multi-page carbon copies with entries often illegible or incomplete. Think you can make sense of this mess? I considered the challenge. I'd organised the middle school library's fiction section as a volunteer project last year, creating a colour-coded system that even the sixth graders could follow. This wasn't so different, just items and locations instead of books and shelves. I think so, I said confidently. Could I use that computer? I pointed to an ancient desktop in the corner. If you can get it working. Nobody's turned that thing on in months. For the next 3 hours, I lost myself in the puzzle of bringing order to chaos. The computer groaned to life after 2 attempts, revealing an outdated version of Excel but one I could work with. I created a spreadsheet for inventory tracking, colour-coded by material type, with columns for quantity, location, project allocation, and reorder dates. When Ray returned to check on me, I was deep in concentration, transferring data from the messy paper forms to my new digital system. "How's it going?" he asked, startling me. "Good." I turned the screen toward him. "I've started with the drywall inventory since that's what we're using most right now. See how each sheet size has its own entry? And this column shows how many are allocated to each room in the building." Ray leaned closer, genuinely interested. "That's more organised than anything we've had before." He studied the spreadsheet. "Think you could add a column for minimum quantities, so we know when to reorder? Reorder? Already planning to," I said, pointing to a column header I'd created. "I just need to know what those minimum quantities should be." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt genuinely useful. Not just a burden being dragged along as some misguided life lesson, but someone contributing real value. When Dad came to get me at the end of the day, Ray was showing me how to reconcile delivery receipts with purchase orders. "Well?" Dad asked, looking between Ray and me. "She's got a good head for systems," Ray said. "Created a tracking spreadsheet that actually makes sense. Might save us some headaches if she keeps at it." Dad nodded, a hint of surprise in his expression. "So she should continue tomorrow?" "I'd say half days in here, half days on site would be ideal," Ray suggested. "She still needs to understand the physical work to really get how the supply chain functions." Dad looked at me, awaiting my reaction. "That sounds fair," I agreed, mentally calculating that half days of physical labour were infinitely better than full days. On the drive home, Dad was unusually quiet. I waited, sensing he wanted to say something but was struggling to find the words. Finally, as we turned onto our street, he spoke. "You impressed Ray today." It wasn't quite praise from him, but it was acknowledgement. The inventory system was a mess, I said with a shrug. It wasn't hard to improve it. Dad pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but didn't immediately move to get out. "When I was your age," he said slowly. "My father never gave me options. It was roofing or nothing. I hated it at first, but eventually—" "You developed grit," I suggested when he trailed off. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Something like that." He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "But maybe there's more than one way to learn those lessons." It was the closest thing to an admission that my idea had merit. I decided not to push my luck by commenting further. That night at dinner, Mum noticed the difference immediately. My hands were still gloved to hide the blisters, but I could lift my fork without wincing, and I wasn't coated in drywall dust. "Better day?" she asked cautiously. "Michelle organised the job trailer," Dad said before I could answer. "Created some computer system for tracking supplies." "Really?" Mum turned to me, eyebrows raised. I nodded, surprised by the hint of pride in Dad's voice. "Ray thinks she should split her time between office work and site work," he continued. "Says she has a good head for systems." Mum shot me a subtle thumbs up behind Dad's back. Later, as I applied fresh antibiotic cream to my blisters, I felt cautiously optimistic. The physical work would still be brutal, but half days were survivable. And the office work, that I could excel at. As I drifted off to sleep, muscles still aching but mind racing with ideas for improving the inventory system, I realised something unexpected. I was actually looking forward to tomorrow. Not because I'd suddenly developed a passion for construction, but because I'd found a way to navigate this situation on my own terms. I'd identified a problem, proposed a solution, and adapted when my first plan wasn't fully accepted. Maybe that was the kind of grit Dad wanted me to develop after all. 2 weeks into my summer internship, as I'd started calling it, partly to annoy Dad, and partly because it made the whole situation sound more legitimate, a new reality had settled in. Mornings were for physical labour. I'd graduated from simply carrying drywall to actually helping install it, learning to measure and mark cutting lines, and occasionally being trusted with the electric screwdriver under close supervision. My hands had begun developing actual calluses, the initial blisters hardening into tougher skin. It still hurt, but differently now, a dull ache rather than sharp pain. Afternoons were my sanctuary in the job trailer, where I'd transformed the chaotic pile of paperwork into a functioning system. The ancient computer now housed spreadsheets tracking everything from inventory to timesheets, and I'd colour-coded the filing cabinets with a labelling system that even the most technologically resistant workers could follow. "You've got a visitor," Carlos called through the trailer door one particularly hot Wednesday afternoon. I looked up from the purchase orders I was organising to see a girl approximately my age standing hesitantly in the doorway. She had curly brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail and was wearing jeans and a t-shirt similar to mine, though notably cleaner. Hi," she said, stepping inside. "I'm Sophia, Ray's daughter." I blinked in surprise. I didn't know Ray had a daughter. "Well, he does." She smiled awkwardly. "He talks about you a lot, the girl who's fixing the office chaos." I felt my cheeks flush with unexpected pride. "I'm just organising things. Dad says you're saving him hours of headaches." Sophia glanced around the trailer. "It already looks way better than when I was here last month. Thanks." I gestured toward the folding chair across from me. "Did you need something, or—" Sophia sat down, setting a small cooler on the floor beside her. "Dad thought you might want some company, plus I brought popsicles." She patted the cooler. "It's brutal out there today." The unexpected kindness caught me off guard. For 2 weeks, I'd been the odd one out, the only girl, the only teenager, the boss's daughter who everyone was polite to but kept at a professional distance. That sounds amazing, actually. I saved my spreadsheet and closed the ancient Excel program. Sophia produced 2 bright blue popsicles from the cooler. As we sat eating them, blue syrup occasionally dripping onto the paperwork I'd hastily moved. Aside, she explained that she often visited the construction sites during summer breaks. "Dad's been doing this since before I was born," she said. "I grew up climbing around half-built houses. Drove my mom crazy." "Does your mom work in construction too?" I asked, curious about this girl who seemed so comfortable in a world I was still adjusting to. Sophia shook her head. "She's a nurse. They're divorced. I stay with Dad every other weekend and for a month in summer." "So you're experienced with all this construction stuff?" I gestured vaguely toward the site outside. "More or less. I can't do a lot of it because of child labour laws and insurance and stuff, but I know how it works." She studied me for a moment. "Your dad's Frank, right? The foreman?" I nodded. "He's scary." This startled a laugh out of me. "You think? Don't you? He's always so serious. Never smiles." I considered this. From the outside, I suppose Dad did present as intimidating. Tall, perpetually stern, with calloused hands and a voice that carried across the construction site. But I'd never thought of him as scary exactly. He's just intense, I settled on. Big on life lessons and building character. Sophia rolled her eyes in immediate understanding. "My dad's the same way sometimes. That's why I'm taking an actual summer school class this year, to escape another month of learning the value of hard work." "Smart," I said, impressed by her foresight. "What class?" "Computer programming. It's for high school credit, but they let me in early because I had good grades." She said this without arrogance, simply stating facts. "Programming, like coding?" Sophia nodded, finishing her popsicle. "It's pretty cool, actually. We're learning Python right now." The conversation shifted to school, mutual complaints about parents, and the discovery that we shared a borderline obsessive love for a particular fantasy book series. By the time Ray knocked on the trailer door an hour later, it felt like I'd known Sophia for years rather than minutes. "I see you two found each other," Ray said, smiling at us both. "Thanks for the popsicles, Mr. Ray," I said. "Dad, can Michelle come to programming class with me tomorrow?" Sophia asked abruptly. They let visitors sit in once a month, and tomorrow's visitor day. I stared at her in surprise. That would be up to her father, Ray said, glancing at me, but I don't see why not if Frank agrees. After they left, I sat pondering this unexpected development. A day away from the construction site sounded heavenly, but would Dad agree? And more importantly, why had Sophia invited me, a virtual stranger, to her class? I didn't have to wait long for answers. Dad arrived at the trailer 30 minutes later. Ray tells me his daughter invited you to some computer class tomorrow, he said without preamble. I nodded, trying to gauge his reaction. It's a programming class at the community college, for high school credit. Dad leaned against the trailer. Door, arms crossed. And you want to go? I think it could be interesting, I said carefully. Computers are important for modern businesses, even construction businesses. I gestured toward the spreadsheets I'd created. Dad was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my astonishment, he chuckled. You don't give up, do you? I learned that from you, I said honestly. Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition perhaps, or a reassessment. One day, he said finally. Ray says he'll pick you up and drop you off since it's on his way. I tried to contain my excitement. Thanks, Dad. He nodded, then looked around the trailer. You've done good work in here. Everyone's noticed. The compliment, rare and unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. The next morning, instead of waking up at 5:30 to go to the construction site, I was ready at 7:45 when Ray's truck pulled into our driveway. Sophia waved enthusiastically from the passenger seat. You're in for a treat, she said as I climbed into the back seat. Professor Yang brings donuts on visitor days. The community college was a cluster of modern buildings, surrounding a green quad. Students of various ages walked between classes, carrying laptops and coffee. It felt worlds away from the dusty construction site. Sophia led me confidently to a computer lab in the technology building, where about 15 teenagers were already settling in front of sleek monitors. This is my friend Michelle, she announced, to a young woman I assumed was Professor Yang. She's visiting today. Friend. The word gave me a warm feeling I hadn't expected. Professor Yang, who looked barely older than some of her students, welcomed me and indeed produced a box of donuts, which were enthusiastically received by the class. For the next 3 hours, I was introduced to the basics of Python programming. While the syntax was new to me, the logical structure felt oddly familiar. It reminded me of the systems I'd created in the job trailer, a place for everything. Everything in its place, with clear rules for how information flowed. You're picking this up fast, Sophia whispered, as I successfully completed a simple exercise that converted Fahrenheit to Celsius. It's kind of like the inventory system, I explained. Just more complex. By the end of class, my brain was buzzing with possibilities. Professor Yang had shown examples of how programming could automate repetitive tasks, exactly the kind of tedious paperwork that filled the job trailer. What did you think? Ray asked, as he drove us back toward the construction site after class. Was amazing, I said honestly. I had no idea programming could be so practical. Ray glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Practical how? I could write programs to automate some of the inventory tracking, I explained, excitement building as I articulated the idea. Maybe even create a simple app for the workers to log materials as they use them, instead of filling out those carbon. Copy forms? Sophia turned in her seat to face me. That would be so cool. We're learning about app development next week. Next week? I echoed, heart sinking. This had been a one-day reprieve, not an ongoing arrangement. You should come back, Sophia said, as if it were already decided. Right, Dad? Ray chuckled. That's between Michelle and her father. The construction site came into view, dust and noise replacing the calm academic atmosphere we'd just left. As we pulled into the dirt lot, I spotted Dad directing a crew unloading lumber from a delivery truck. Thanks for letting me come along, I said to Ray and Sophia as I climbed out. Same time next Thursday? Sophia called after me. I hesitated, then nodded. I had no idea if Dad would agree, but something had shifted in my perspective. This wasn't just about escaping physical labour anymore. I'd genuinely found something that interested me, something I might actually be good at. Dad noticed me approaching and stepped away from the lumber delivery. "How was computer school?" he asked, the slight emphasis on computer betraying his scepticism. "Really interesting," I said. "We learned basic programming, how to give the computer instructions to solve problems automatically." He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds complicated." "It's actually logical," I explained, "like building something but with code instead of materials." Dad considered this, squinting against the afternoon sun. "And this is something you want to keep doing?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, the class meets once a week. I could still work here the other 4 days." I expected resistance, a lecture about commitment or following through on what we'd started. Instead, Dad surprised me. "Let me think about it." He glanced toward the job trailer. "For now, Ray said there's a supply discrepancy you might be able to sort out. Something about missing lumber invoices. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And more importantly, he was acknowledging my contribution, not just tolerating my presence or trying to toughen me up, but recognizing that I had skills valuable to the operation. That evening, I found Dad in our garage, meticulously organising his tools, a Friday night ritual he'd maintained for as long as I could remember. "Need help?" I offered, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, surprised. I'd never voluntarily participated in tool organisation before. "Sure." He gestured toward a pile of screwdrivers. "Those need to be sorted by type and size." I sat on the concrete floor and began arranging Phillips and flathead screwdrivers in ascending order of size. We worked in comfortable silence for several minutes. "I talked to Ray about that computer class," Dad said finally. I kept my eyes on the screwdrivers, trying not to appear too eager. "Oh?" "He said the instructor was impressed with how quickly you picked things up." I hadn't known that. Warmth spread through my chest at the praise. "Ray also mentioned—" Dad paused, setting down the wrench he'd been polishing. "He said you had ideas about creating computer programs for the construction business. Apps or something." I nodded, finally looking up. "The inventory system could be automated. Workers could input data directly instead of using paper forms that get lost or damaged." Dad studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and re-evaluation. "You're serious about this?" "I am," I said firmly. "It's interesting to me, and it could actually help the business." Dad ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognised as his processing signal. But I caught the slight upward curve of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close. "Dad?" I ventured after another moment of silence. "Is this still about teaching me grit? Or are you actually letting me explore something I might be good at?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. He set down his tools and turned to face me fully. "Maybe both," he admitted. "Working construction teaches certain lessons, important ones, but—" He hesitated, as if the next words were difficult to form. "But finding what you're actually good at, what makes you want to work hard, that's important too." It was possibly the most insightful thing Dad had ever said to me. An acknowledgement that perhaps his original plan for my summer education had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. "I'm still going to make you carry drywall on Mondays," he added, his gruff demeanour returning. I laughed, the sound echoing in the garage. "I figured." As I finished sorting the screwdrivers, I realised my hands no longer hurt when I gripped the metal tools. The blisters that had once brought me to tears had transformed into calluses, not just on my palms but in my mind. I'd learned to endure, to adapt, to find opportunities where they weren't immediately obvious. Perhaps that had been Dad's goal all along. Or perhaps we were both learning something new about who I was and who I could become. You're smiling, Dad observed, breaking into my thoughts. Just thinking, I replied, about how sometimes the worst things can lead to unexpected opportunities. Dad nodded slowly, a glimmer of understanding passing between us. That, he said, might be the most important lesson of all.